Hi, everybody, and welcome into the Comics Lair for our discussion of the DC Comics Festival of Heroes one-shot celebrating Asian superheroes. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. I'd like to invite my guests today to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their interest in comic books and Asian culture. Eilis, do you want to start?
Why don't I start? Let's see now. My name is Eilis Flynn. Let's see now. I am of Asian ancestry. I use Eilis Flynn because I married a Flynn, and so it's really fun to see people's confusion when they see me and they hear the name. Let's see now. My mother was Japanese. Japanese was my first language. Japanese culture was the one I was most comfortable with until we got back here, decades ago. And it was my ongoing interest in comics, both in the Japanese sense of manga and the American sense of comic books. And I got the variant cover because I got them both because I thought they were both kind of cute. Also, I was feeling indulgent. Anyway, and my background in comics, well, as Nancy knows, because she has a vague memory of this, let's see now, I got interested in the Legion of Superheroes back when I was very young. In fact, I married somebody I met through the Legion of Superheroes, the DC team, the one who gets really maligned and really, they don't treat the Legion very well. But anyway, and let's see, what else can I tell? Yes, I wrote lots of letters at one point between the ages of probably 15 and 17. And then I wrote a few comic stories for DC Comics. I was a proofreader there for 6 months, and I also did some freelance proofreading there for some time. Let's see now. And until now, there has been very little Asian references in American comics until this big interest in manga came about. And then finally, all of a sudden, characters could be Asian, characters can be biracial, characters could not necessarily be blonde and blue-eyed, Let's see now, which is why I found this particular book of great interest, and that's why I'm here to talk about it. Anna?
So I'm Anna Alexander. I write paranormal romance as far as the Evolutionary series and the Heroes of Saturn series. I've also run many conferences. For a while, I was the chapter president of the Seattle Greater Romance Writers of America. I also put on the Seattle UnCon, which is a business conference for self-published and just published authors in general. My Asian heritage is much like Nancy's, where it's a quarter. My grandfather is from the Philippines, and fortunately, like many, not just Filipinos or Asians, a lot of immigrants when they came to the country in the early 1900s not really suffered, but they experienced my family's now American, so we are going to be American people. So I wasn't introduced to any of the Filipino culture as a child when he was alive because we're American. He's no longer going to show that we're other in any way. So my father never learned Spanish, never learned Tagalog, and so I miss out. I miss being part of that or feeling part of that culture. And my daughter is very into anime and manga, and she's learning Japanese. And so I've gotten more into learning about the Asian cultures, especially Japanese, because it is her world now. And so I want to understand what it is she's getting out of some of these series, because I'll hear it in the background, I'll see it. I'm like, what is happening in this show? And she's like, oh, so-and-so Demon Slayer, such and such this, and I'm like, I gotta understand more what she's into. So that's why this was very engaging to me, or at least I was interested in it, because the question was brought up earlier, what are we aware of as far as Asian characters in comics? And I haven't really paid attention. I haven't noticed it because sometimes they'll say, you don't find out till later that that character was Asian because nothing about them looks Asian, nothing appears Asian, they don't have any of their culture in their character. Maybe they've used one shade of Pantone darker when they color, and that was supposed to be the cue to me to go, oh, that's right, they're Asian. You're like, they were? Oh, okay, sure. So it's nice, to have that spotlight being a little bit brighter on these characters, because it should have always been there. So I'm glad that they are. I don't know if this was the particular vehicle to do it in, but at least it's a start.
Well, actually, it was one of those things that it was interesting because it was something that they said, I know, this will be good PR for us. We will put this together and it will be as cutesy pie as possible. And lo and behold, that's what they did. Bless their little heart.
It does have, some good butt kicking. And since we're doing full disclosure here, as Anna said, I have a teeny tiny little bit of Filipino heritage, but I was not raised with that culture at all. And other than that, I'm part Spanish, English polyglot, Scotch Irish. So I don't have that in my cultural wiring. Mm-hmm. And I actually also was a Legion of Superheroes fan and read mostly DC. Still, I read more Marvel than I used to, but I mean, that's kind of what I'm bringing to the table tonight. And one of the things that Anna alluded to was the awareness or impression of Asian superheroes and characters in DC, in not just DC Comics, but in comics in general. And Eilis mentioned it as well. And, I would see an Asian character pop up here and there, like Cheshire or Katana. It's back and forth about Damian Wayne because he doesn't get spotlighted in terms of that part of his heritage. I mean, yes, he's the son of Ra's al Ghul, and grandson of Ra's al Ghul, was supposed to lead the League of Assassins. Talia's his mother. Mm-hmm. But there's not a lot of Asian cultural influence in Damian Wayne. He's the blood son, as he likes to say, of Bruce Wayne. And so after you read this book, how did you feel about the kind of presence of these characters in the DC universe?
In the case of Damian Wayne, I got the feeling that when it was convenient, and sorry, I should put that more correctly, when it's convenient, all of a sudden he might actually have some Asian background, but only if it's convenient. Otherwise, he's, again, the same Pantone color that everyone else is. But that's an interesting thing there, because a lot of cases, as Anna said, and as you said, unless you actually grow up in that particular, culture, it's just not something that you think about. If you grow up in this culture, in say, in my case, Japanese culture, when I came here, when we got back here, the first thing I saw was Saturday morning cartoons, in which I said, ooh, look, Saturday morning cartoons, and they're superheroes, like the things that I have read in the comics that I would get at the PX. And then I found out that unlike, say, in Japanese society, there were only cartoons, only on Saturday mornings, which just struck me as very odd, because on Japanese TV, anime is every day. Anime is part of the culture. So it took me a long time, and it took American culture a long time to say, maybe we can actually have this stuff during the rest of the week, because it is part of us. Superman is part of us and has been since 1938. But of course, right now, the CW, that's not really cartoons, even though some of the plot lines certainly do allude to its comic book background. Anyway, sorry, I just started to blab there.
That's okay. Anna, did you want to add anything?
I could. So what I took away from as the stories as a whole is that it could have, these stories could be, these or vignettes could be anybody in any culture. It wasn't like they did a flashlight up, like when you're walking down the street, anybody walking down the street, they look like they're walking down the street. No one culture has this distinctive walk necessarily. The only time I was ever in a place where visually you could see culture was many years ago. I was in Scotland, and it actually took me 3 days to figure out why walking down the street, besides the fact that I was in Scotland, why did it feel different? And then I realized it's because everybody wore clothes that fit them. There wasn't an oversized coat, there wasn't a baggy jean, there wasn't a baseball cap. So that would be like the only thing where visually, if you saw someone walking down the street and they had no face or no skin tone, I could say, oh yeah, that person is from this culture, possibly. So that's how I felt like with these stories, is that it wasn't necessarily Asian stories that were being told. These characters could have been anyone from anywhere. Like even the story with, I'm trying to see if I can find which one it was, Family Dinner, where you had an LGBTQ couple. And again, and it wasn't anything like, oh my gosh, they're gay characters, oh my gosh, they're gay and Asian. There was nothing said about anything. It was just two people meeting one of the other people's parents for dinner. Again, it wasn't really something that said, oh, they're Asian to me. And so, and I don't know if that's a good thing or if it's a bad thing. It's just what I took away from it is that these were just stories. They weren't necessarily Asian stories, they're just stories for the most part.
They're American stories.
I think,
they're American stories. And because they're being done by, I assume, mostly American creators. And it's not simply a matter of, yes, my background, there is an Asian background. They're just saying, I'm an American, but, my grandfather was Filipino, and I think that is, you're right. These are all American stories, but with a vaguely Asian filter. And that the thing about the Grace Choi story that I found really interesting is I don't know whether it's the Amazonian part of her that makes her look remarkably not Asian, or maybe the bright red hair. And I don't know the character in the comics. I don't know whether that's dyed or that's real. Of course, it probably also depends on the whoever's doing the art on the book. But I found it saying, well, you may not remember, but there was an artist named Brian Boland, and he did a series for DC many years ago called, and Mike is over here saying, yes, thumbs up, great series, called Camelot 3000. Absolutely gorgeous art. And unfortunately, I have to actually look up who this is because I have already forgotten his name. I'm old. This isn't what I do anymore. Anyway, okay, Sean Chen and Rapman as inker. They did a beautiful job. She didn't really look Asian though, except, the last scene, I think, Choi actually had her eyes look slightly Asian, but that was about it. Again, you're right. It's an American story. It's a comic story, but not very much of it was Asian story.
Well, I'm sort of torn between the stories that are they are American characters. They're based in North America for the most part. I'm sort of torn between whether I liked the stories that are just stories that could be anybody, but they're Asian characters. And we won't talk about how seeing people fight together all of a sudden flips the switch on approval of a relationship. That's kind of complicated storytelling, I think, but that's not really the point of the story. Or whether the stories that are more overtly speechifying, for lack of a better word.
Okay.
But I guess it depends on what you're looking for. I would have liked a little bit of a mix of not so much the speechifying, but the calling attention to the cultural differences, like the story, I think it's called Perceptions, the one with Atom.
Yes, Perceptible. perceptible. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But really, he attacks a menace in the guy's DNA, and he succeeds, and that's great. And then the next thing we know, he's making a speech to Bruce Wayne about the work ethic of Asian immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would rather have had a panel highlighting that work ethic and more seeing it in action. And I don't know if that's because these stories were so short for the most part that it doesn't really give you room to develop a character arc. But I'm not sure which is more effective in raising people's consciousness, and I don't even know if that was the intention of this book.
Yeah, that is the other thing is, I guess, if you don't know what the intention is, and they are such short stories, why make them so short?
Well,
My question, because I think two of the most Asian-y feel was like What's in the Box had that animation. I was like, okay, here's where I'm at, and it was 2 pages, and 3 pages. Now, oh, okay.
We know that with Cass and Clayface picked up on an arc that ran, I get confused whether it was Detective or Batman, and it really featured the Bat family, and Clayface had kind of reformed and sort of joined them, and he was really close with Cass. And this is a spoiler, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it because these books came out literally years ago. And so if this is going to spoil it for you, you are too late. I'm sorry. That woman killed him. And it was a huge thing between Kate and Cass. And so I sort of like that little nod to their friendship in that story. But I wasn't really sure what the point of the story was, except, well, they're eating this interesting thing and they're sharing it. And Clayface comes up, he's huge when he comes into panel. And then by the time he gets down to where Cass is sitting, he's taken on the shape of a kid. And then they share this box of food, and Damian was mean to her, and Clayface is offering her support. And that's the story. I mean, it really is a vignette. But I wasn't sure what the point of it was, of the story. If it's to say that they're still friends again, I think that's nice. I liked that whole arc with the Bat family and Detective or Batman, whichever one it was. But I didn't see the point of it.
No, I think that was just a little character study, and sounds like it did the job, since you're still remembering it all these years later.
Yeah, I mean, this little story was sweet, and it kind of was a callback to that very extended arc in the Bat books. So of the books that were in this collection, of the stories that were in this book, which ones were your favorites? Let's talk about those first.
Well, I already told you that my favorite was Kaui Calamity, just because it was so unlike any of the others. It was just one of those things, as we said, in saying, what the heck is going on here, until you realize, oh, that's cute. Ah, wow, that just made my 5 minutes, So I'd say that was my favorite. But I don't know I'd have to think about what I really didn't like.
Well, that's going to be next. So
okay, I will give it some thought.
I don't know if I necessarily had one favorite. There was certain things that would stick out to me about each story. That was okay, that was the takeaway. The first one, which was sounds, which was language is the first gift parents give their children, and which I found very interesting, because it's language can be turned into language, ideas, thoughts, but it is a gift that you give to your children, and that's something that struck me. I was like, this is cool, and then the book went not where I was expecting it, so I'm not sure what to think after that. But also masks was the other one, which was that sometimes masks were meant to be shown the world who we really are, and I think especially this last year and masks.
Yes.
Masks came into play, all sorts of physical masks and not physical masks as well. Very much timely discussion, and you can dive forever. But that really struck me as so I think I like that one the best. As far as what I think is as possible Asian representation, to the most part, would have been the one that was Hawk and Kong, because it was just them, and it didn't introduce just everyday Asian culture with them just trying to get to dinner and then the dinner getting spilled and whatnot. And that was an important thing, is that family dinner. And that as a whole, that's the story for me that represented, okay, here's just basic everyday Asian culture. Here it is. Relate to it. Here's something that you can relate to, because we all have dinner with our family.
Mhm.
And so I think that's those two, masks and Hawk and Kong, were probably my favorites.
What
And
I
those
would,
were-
My
sorry?
favorites were and now like we've just been talking about it, and Sounds. I totally forgot the title. Sounds.
Yeah, sounds.
Cassandra Cain and Oracle story, because I really liked it in the comic when Cass had been raised to be an assassin, for any viewers who are not familiar with that, and went against her father's code and became a member of the Bat family. And it was Barbara Gordon who tried to help her make up for deficiencies in her education, which makes sense because Barbara used to be a librarian. And so she's got a wide knowledge base, and she's the perfect person to help this young woman regain the education that her father, or gain the education her father had denied her. And so I like the little glimpse of Cass and Barbara, because that was a callback to a story series I had really liked. And I liked the ending where she just kind of stood there tongue-tied as this cute guy kind of blathered. And I thought it was an interesting juxtaposition that Cass can't talk and he can't shut up. And so,
Yes.
and then she thought, well, this is not all lost. She's disappointed in herself, but she decides, I can come back from this. And she goes and finds him and actually manages to find the right word at the right time. And
Yes.
so I really liked that about that story. As a story, I liked the Masks story because of the interaction between Catwoman and Shoes. And it had a full story arc. It's Shoes thinking about her past and telling us who she is. Then she confronts a problem. Then she needs help. Catwoman helps her. It's obvious they have a close relationship. And then they talk about how you learn as you go. And they make fun of Batman, which was kind of cute, little moment of bonding. The only thing I did not like about that story is that Shoes is Leanne Harper. And for fans who have not been around long enough to understand why that would be troubling, Leanne Harper is the daughter of Roy Harper and the assassin Cheshire. And in some continuity that has long since been brushed away, Dick Grayson helped Roy recover his daughter, and Cheshire gave her to him, like gave Leanne to Roy to raise. And there were all these cute scenes. She turned up in Titans. They were her honorary aunts and uncles. She was just so cute. And for a character like Roy, who's kind of known for vigorously playing the field, to be an engaged and affectionate father to this child, just really, I thought, gave his character lots of layers and depth. And then Leanne was killed in a battle in Star City, and then she was apparently returned in Convergence, though I managed to miss that. And so I was hoping that we would get Leanne back in this massive shuffling of continuities. We would return to a continuity where A, Roy was alive, and B, Leanne was his little girl and he was taking care of her. So although I like the story as a story, I would rather the main character had been somebody other than Leanne Harper, if that makes sense.
I think she was there because she was convenient.
Well, that could be. But as somebody on Twitter was pointing out this morning, okay, as near as we can tell in the newly reshuffled continuity, Roy would be about 27 or 28 years old. And he was about 17 or 18 when Leanne was born, maybe 20, 21. And yet now she's a teenager. And so it's kind of like all continuities now exist, and we're taking one from column A and one from column B, and we're going to do that. So
Well, it's SORAS, soap opera rapid aging syndrome.
I hadn't heard that before.
Oh yeah, it's a soap opera thing. A kid who is just born suddenly turns up as a teenager. It's an amazing thing. And yeah, that sounds like that's what happened there.
There was some character, it was Donna Troy's baby, who was born, and he got older quickly, and then they killed him in a car wreck, so it ultimately didn't matter. But I mean, her pregnancy just shot along, and then anyway. Okay, so back to the topic. So what was your least favorite story in the book?
Well, let's see now.
I think I can answer it. I think it was the Shazam fight, because I think it was just a page. And I was flipping, going, am I missing something? I think I might have been missing something. So I'm going to say Shazam fight.
I missed 2 pages of that story because I got lost in the splash panels the first time I read it. And so things did not make sense to me. And I got to the end and I'm like, what do you mean you served as a decoy for Shazam? That didn't happen in this story. And then I was going back through it, making notes for the discussion. And I discovered there were 2 pages to the story that I hadn't seen, which explained why his parents were wearing what appeared to be spacesuits at the end of the story. But Eilis, you're nodding.
I'm nodding because, that was I think that was the story that I kept saying, really? You have this great character and you're doing this with him? Why? So, yeah, I had that problem saying, okay, I'm going on to the next one.
Well, I would have to say that was my least favorite story too. Not only because I found it confusing to read as I went through, but because I thought Shazam was out of character. And I don't like to see, DC Comics has a particular problem, in my opinion, which I know that not everyone shares because I've had discussions with friends on Twitter about it. But in my opinion, DC Comics has a tendency to, in order to build character A up, they denigrate character B, who might be the hero of a whole separate book, and give character B unappealing and unheroic traits for the purpose of building up character A in this story. And I think they do that a good bit. And so I read that and I thought, you could have had Sam in the story and not made him a jerk.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I think this is one of those things that unfortunately, I don't know what the editing, how the editing went for this thing, how much there was give and take. I think there could have been more take.
Yeah. Well, and apparently they're introducing this character and he's going to have a feature later in the year.
Oh, okay.
The story was intended to be kind of a springboard for that, but it was such a downer note. For me, there was nothing that pulled me forward to the next story. It's like he hates superheroes. Okay, because Shazam was a jerk in this story. Yeah. He would hate at least Shazam. But I like a story ending to either tie a story off or springboard me in the direction we're going if it's continued. And for me, this didn't do either one.
The problem is, I realized that was the Monkey Prince. The Monkey Prince fable in Asian society, there's a variation in most Asian cultures. So I was really surprised to see it pop up here, and I didn't really like the execution, but I'm not the target audience. But yeah, it didn't really work well, and I can only assume that what's his name, Gene Yang, I can only assume that it's going to be fleshed out as time goes on, if they're actually thinking this is going to be a big thing for them, because it's using Asian culture tenets. I mean, good luck to them.
Yeah. Anna, did you want to add anything?
No, that was pretty much, you all kind of pretty much hit that. I guess I think at one story there's 2 ways about it, which was the Festival of Heroes, because it was, I think because it was the classic story of, oh, here's the white supremacists interrupting what should be fun and nice and inclusive. And is it timely? Yes. But have we seen it before?
Yes.
So it was one of those kind of missed opportunities, I think. I don't know how, I'd have to spend time to really think about how they could have changed it. But again, it was just one of those, oh, we've seen this before. And it was typical. And I wanted something a little bit more.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have something a little bit more.
It was there because, again, it was pandering to the public.
Mm-hmm.
But the two things that came to mind is it's been years since I've been in New York, and clearly I missed this. This is something I would have had so much fun with.
Yeah.
And two, food. That was one thing I did enjoy about the book. The fact that they did introduce foods that were obviously familiar to the creators, and dumplings in particular. There were 3/4 of the stories had something going on with dumplings.
Mm-hmm.
I found that really amusing. And of course, with the Kong and Hawk thing, I found it very nice, the fact that Kong said, "Ooh, that sort of smells like my favorite home food." And of course, what they're looking for is kimchi, and the food that he's come up with is not kimchi, although it's pretty tasty. And what I found really interesting is, yes, but just remember, it's all pretty much from the same basis. All sorts of Japanese legends and foods, very different now, but they all probably had their basis in a Chinese dish. It could be 1,000 years ago. It's just something that has been changed so that it fits what's available in whatever country you're in. So, No. After reading that, I had this sudden urge to have dumplings, so I had to go and make some Japanese dumplings. So.
But that story did have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so
Yes.
It was a full story. It wasn't just a vignette. And one of the things I liked about it was seeing Katana work in a team.
Yes.
He was an outsiders as part of the team. And I always thought she was kind of an interesting character. And so to see her again was great. But that also raises the question of, okay, I think it's good to showcase characters in general we don't get to see very much, because some of them might strike a chord with somebody, and it would give DC Comics or Marvel Comics or Boom Studios or whoever a chance to make more money. And if they make more money, they put out more books, and that works for us. So I think that was nice, but to see the characters showcased, but if they're not showcased again anytime soon, what's the value to doing it this time?
Here?
Yeah.
Well, pandering. But
You've frozen.
She froze again.
We'll just wait a minute. You can cut that.
What?
You froze.
No, I'm getting a message that internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
We're quiet, and Jim can cut that out. And I took a note of how far into the program we are. So don't just say what you were going to say.
That means I have to remember.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, why these characters who are otherwise not seen very much. There's always the chance that some creator out there who is popular, who has pull, will say, I sort of like that. Let's see what I can do with it. And we can only hope that they do it well enough so that people remember it and it keeps being used. Katana is an example. I mean, I don't think I had thought about Katana except as the weapon until I saw a reference to it on the TV show Arrow, at which point I said, oh, look at what character they're going to be using. Goody. Because, of course, it had been years since I'd even thought about her because, she had just dropped out of sight. So we can only hope that that's also the case there. And I don't know, well, you would know, but they had that one pager of Karate Kid, because he was my first introduction to sort of Asian, sort of not in DC Comics. Yes, Nancy sort of rolls her eyes saying, okay. And it's this character who was introduced in the Legion of Superheroes. He looked remarkably white when he was introduced. He was the master of all martial arts, right? And then somewhere along the way, he started to, overnight, he looked like Bruce Lee. And it turned out that, if I recall, the creator of that particular character had really wanted him to be Asian, but it was not something that was going to fly for the editorial staff or whatever. So he had to wait. He went away. But then, if I recall, it was Mike Grell. Mike Grell said, oh, looky, let's try this, because he was a big fan of Bruce Lee. But that character was actually half Japanese. And it came, Mike is actually giving me, it was Dave Cockrum, which makes a lot more sense because I was a bigger fan of Cockrum than I ever was of Grell.
Well,
and
Cockrum made him Asian.
Oh, Cockrum made him Asian.
Grell made him Bruce Lee.
All right. Cockrum made him Asian, and Grell made him Bruce Lee.
Well, see, that's not fair, because it's like on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you have a lifeline sitting next to you. Anna and I have to just go with what we remember. You're cheating. Yeah. You have an advantage.
Well, no, Mike has not read this book, but he can tell me anything I need to know about the classic Legion of Superheroes, including what book they're in.
Well, and actually, for those who are not familiar with the Legion of Superheroes of the Silver Age, they all looked like standard Earth human people, except one of them was green and he was a genius.
Yes.
One of them was orange and he had an antenna and he could shapeshift. And
yes.
I think that's it, isn't it?
Shadowlass.
Shadowlass. Yes, thank you, Mike.
It was blue.
But other than that, it was just pretty much standard. And so I think that's one reason a lot of fans were shocked by the recent incarnation. But that's there again, I'm meandering off. This happens when the Legion of Superheroes comes up. So, but Karate Kid, I was sort of surprised that he didn't have a story in here, because he was the first, and I guess maybe they thought he'd already had plenty of exposure, and everybody who'd ever read the Legion and therefore cared already knew who Karate Kid was. I don't know.
Yes, but think of all those Legion fans who would have bought the book, But yeah, I think he was there specifically because it was a little thing saying, yes, Val Armour, he who was DC Comics' first biracial superhero.
Well, and he went toe to toe with Superboy,
Yes,
for a few seconds. But to go toe to toe with Superboy for a few seconds is a pretty remarkable accomplishment when you don't have any, particular powers except what you've just developed in your frame. So
well, he was the master of he was there because of super karate.
Yeah, and I think the debut story was called "One of Us is a Traitor." And
Oh yeah,
yeah,
Jim Shooter. Yes.
But Karate Kid was very prominent in the Legion, and I think they just found him useful. But the fact that he was half Asian was almost never mentioned until he developed a more Asian appearance. It's like sort of the fact that the character called Timberwolf looked remarkably ordinary till some artist decided he should be incredibly hairy. And from then on, he was incredibly hairy because he was the result of an experiment and so forth.
Yes.
But,
But a lot of these things might come about because they're going through puberty.
Well, even superheroes go through puberty at some point.
Exactly.
Well, and that actually raises the story. I think, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right, but I think his name is Tai Pham, the 13-year-old Green Lantern who was insulted because of his cultural dress.
Right.
And that's another vignette, because we see him with his grandmother, and this rude person insults him, and his grandmother said, well, why blend in when you can stand out? And then he kind of repeats that later. And I thought, this is a potentially really interesting character. I looked at his profile in the back of the book, and he became a Green Lantern at 13 when he inherited his grandmother's power ring, and then he had to be trained into the job. And that, to me, would have been a more interesting way to look at that character, something that showcased that part of his origin, than this would have been. I mean, it was a nice little moment, but that's all it was, a nice little moment.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. And what I also found interesting about that story is what the like you said, what the grandmother said. And what she said is diametrically opposite to the old saying in Japanese culture, which is, don't stand out. It's a homogeneous society. So I said, wow, that is different.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, in that particular thing doesn't usually go over well in American society. So what she said makes a lot more sense.
Well, and I think that character is Vietnamese, and
yeah,
I know almost nothing about Vietnamese culture. So
great food.
Anna, did you want to add anything? We kind of got sidetracked on a Legion of Superheroes tangent, but would you like to add anything and kind of bring us back into the subject at hand?
Oh, sure. Well, that was the funny thing about dress code is I'm trying to remember who it was that was insulting him. But I always find it when characters insult what other characters look like in comics, especially when that character is like from another planet, it's another species, they're full on battle armor with spikes and whatever, and it's just, sure, that's what you're going to go with is my looks, whatever. But yeah, that was the sentence that was why fit in when you can stand out. That's the one I put down in my notes, because it is a message that is, well, especially my childhood era. I grew up in the I am somebody era, was all through schools, which is both, again, a good thing and a bad thing, because I think that's where we started breeding entitlement, was I am somebody. But still a good message. Why fit in when you can stand out? She's making her grandson feel better, and that's all that's important.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you all would like to say in general about this? I mean, we've really kind of covered a bunch of things about the specific stories, but let's go through it and kind of see how we felt about it. I did feel handicapped in reading this because I wasn't sure what the intention of the book as a whole was. And I wasn't even sure whether there was an intention for the book as a whole, that if there was a goal to be met by this showcase, or if it was designed to serve multiple goals. And so that made it a little difficult to evaluate the stories within that context.
Mm-hmm.
Well, reading Jeff Yang's intro, it wasn't, I think, so what struck me about that was that it reminded me of my cousin, who is Korean, and he was adopted in the 80s when that whole Asian baby, Korean babies specifically, was almost huge every day. And yeah, so he was the kid that was different from the moment, and grew up in a white family and a Hispanic family, and didn't have a lot of his culture. My aunt and uncle tried very, very hard to introduce him to Asian, especially Korean culture as a child, but he was still a kid growing up in small town America. And so I think I was expecting more stories where it was, and I guess they did follow through, as in we experience things the same no matter our culture. So like Superman's story is like an immigrant story and such. So the stories were just so short, though. I think it fell short. There was the intention there, but it just fell short in execution because, yeah, they showed us in their everyday world. Cool. Now what? I don't even know if I made sense there, but that's what I took away is I got the intention. It's just the execution fell a little bit short. I think I wish I had taken more time with each story. If it was just a little sample pack, that's what it was. It was a little sample pack. And some of the stories did do a little bit better of me wanting to read more about these characters. And some of them, I think you would have had to have known their history too much. And because of that, I wasn't engaged in it because I didn't know the context or the backstory. So that's why I was just left as, this was nice and this was a fun read. I'm afraid it might be a little forgettable, though.
Yeah, I can see why you'd say that because yes, it was something, Nancy has said it, you've said it. What's the point of this? And, I just assumed that it was pandering because, I'm a mean person. And speaking of that introduction, clearly there are more Asian creators out there that they can also look a spotlight on. And Jeff Yang's thing reminded me, there was a Japanese American artist named Bob Fujitani who worked during World War II. He actually had to use a pseudonym so he didn't end up in the camps. And, I keep wondering about him. He just died last year. And whenever when I saw the thing with Jeff Yang, I said, think of what that poor guy must have gone through. He would have been in terror that he was going to be found out and sent to a camp. So he had to keep a low profile. He had to use a fake name. And he had to keep telling people, no, I'm Chinese. So,
and that's a period in our history that we tend to like not to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I looked at this book and I immediately thought of him and saying that there's more to be explored here.
Yeah.
Because,
I'm looking at that too. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Now, all these creators obviously are either biracial or, they have, they're Asian American. And there's more to be explored and there's more to be done. Who knows? Maybe DC will have another one next year.
Well, that was kind of his point, that there had been earlier collections and that they still left plenty of room to explore. Part of his point, anyway, in the introduction.
Yeah.
We've kind of gone through the stories for the most part, but how about if I just run down what they are, and then if there's anybody wants to add anything else, then we can do that. So the first one was Sounds, the Cass story. Then Dress Code, the Vietnamese story.
Yes.
Hong Kong.
Yeah. That was cute.
It was cute. I would have liked Hawk to be a little bit nicer, but then I like people to be nice, especially toward the end of the story.
Well, and he's young. And that's one thing, whenever I see a story like that, you also have to keep in mind, they're young, they'll learn. Well, theoretically.
Theoretically, yeah. Special Delivery.
Yeah.
I got hung up on that one because the pizza delivery guys were being assassinated, and I spent way too much time trying to figure out why pizza delivery guys and were they mule, and so I was focusing on the wrong thing that whole story.
I was kind of focusing on that too, and they're killing the delivery people, and so Damian says, what was your plan? You're going to poison the pizza? And they're like, yeah. And then I started thinking, okay, well, pizza's made to order, so how are you going to poison all the pizzas, and how does murdering the delivery guys help you accomplish whatever poisoning the pizza would tend to poison the customer? And why does the League of Assassins care about this pizza place anyway? And so I got kind of hung up on those aspects of the story.
Unimportant things, and yeah.
it was kind of interesting to see Damian's view of himself compared to his various family connections. I'm like them in this way,
Yes.
and I'm different in this way.
Right.
But it was basically, aside from the details we got hung up on, Damian Wayne's view of himself in 2 pages, or maybe 3, I forget.
It was short, whatever it was.
Yeah, it was short. And then after that was Masks, which I think we've talked about. If anybody wants to add anything.
No, actually, Cheshire was new to me, and I found her really intriguing. That's the note that I have.
Well, she was intriguing back in those days because she was one of the deadliest assassins, and yet she and Roy Harper had this child together, and it kind of played off that, and it played off Dick Grayson's friendship with Roy Harper because he helped him find Leanne, and kind of gave the Titans a family feeling, which apparently was anathema once we kicked off New 52. And so, I don't know. I mean, I liked it as a story. I would personally rather have had Leanne back in a different way, but I think I said that already.
Okay.
And then Family Dinner.
Yeah. I think
I think my favorite part of Family Dinner was just the sister on her phone going, fights going down, and taking pictures with her and the bad guy down.
That felt like a young person dinner. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I'm always a sucker for a good fight scene, and that was a pretty good fight scene. So I like that. And we don't see the Black Lightning family very often, so it was nice to see them, the Pearsons.
Yes.
So that was nice. I'm not sure, from my perspective, not only as a parent, but having been a teenager, that if my parents had lit into somebody I was involved with at the dinner table, I don't think that would have served to sever that connection. I don't think that would have convinced me to walk away. Just saying, everybody has a different strategy, but I looked at that and went, "You're so blowing this," when he started that. Kawaii Calamity and Miko Queen of Cuteness.
Hawaii.
Kawaii?
Yes, cute.
Oh, is that what? Okay. Anna, did you want to say something else?
Little hearts.
Yes, little hearts. Yeah. Anybody want to add anything on Festival of Heroes?
I like the use of food.
Well, and I liked the superhero cosplayers who popped in a couple of the scenes as well. Perceptible.
Which one was Perceptible?
That was the one with the atom, and the story starts and he's inside the guy trying to defeat that thing.
Yes.
His DNA. Yeah,
I really didn't need to see the snot coming out of the guy's nose, but you know, this is what young people think is really clever. So.
Well, you know, to me, that's no worse than the tendency in some action movies to slow-mo after a punch. And so you see blood and teeth just flying in slow-mo across the screen. And I'm like, I really could have done without that. So
yeah, that's one of those roll your eyes and, you know, what's next kind of thing.
Yeah. So we've kind of discussed everything else that I had on my list. Do either of you want to add anything?
No, I commented on the 2 big things that I really thought about. You know, all 5 seconds of which was Bob Fujitani and Val Harmer. So.
Okay. That was a beautiful Karate Kid splash page. It's too bad
it was
the front splash page of a story, but
yeah,
you know, we've already got a $9.99 book. I mean, it's already this thick. Why can't we make it a little thicker and add $1 or something? I don't know. Okay, so I guess we'll wrap up there. And if each of you would like to tell the audience what you're working on and where people can find you, that would be great. Anna, do you want to start?
Sure. So I can be found pretty much anywhere. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. On Instagram, it's annaM.Alexander, and I have AnnaAlexander.net. If you want to find me on my website. I also have some YouTube channels. One is just me doing book reviews and little trailers of some of my earlier books. And then I just launched a few months ago a new channel called Dish About the Dish. It's about where the foods we eat tell the stories of our lives, as well as some tutorials and some cocktail recipes. Do you have a lot of cocktail recipes? I have a what would Anna drink? It's very known at conferences. So yeah, so people can find me on YouTube and online, and that's mostly what I'm working on now is the channel.
Okay. Eilis?
Let's see now. At the moment, I can be found on Facebook as Eilis Flynn. That's Eilis Flynn. Let's see now. Twitter, Instagram, even though I'm still not sure about the actual use of Instagram, but again, I'm old. Let's see now. You can find me. Most of the time I'm usually doing my editing thing at emsflynn.com. Let's see now. My writing website is Eilis, EILIS which I really should manage more. Let's see now. And I think that's about it. You just keep doing what you've been doing day after day, right?
Right. Well, you can find me at nancynorthcott.com. I spend more time than is good for me on Twitter, where I'm at Nancy Northcott. My newest release is historical fantasy set during the Napoleonic Wars, which is I write the War King's Honor trilogy for Falstaff Books, science fiction mysteries with Jeannie Adams, and various subgenres of romance. And I'm here on ConTinual, the con that never ends. I would like to thank our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more about them, you can visit www.heroesonline.com. And I'd like to thank Anna Alexander and Eilis Flynn for joining me in this discussion. And I would also like everyone to be aware that the opinions expressed are our independent opinions and not those of anyone associated with Heroes Aren't Hard to Find or ConTinual except us, except the three of us. And finally, thank you to everyone who's watching this panel. We appreciate it.